Political spying operations. For years, people claimed the government was using intelligence agencies to spy on political opponents, break into offices, and sabotage opposition campaigns. They said the most powerful office in the nation was coordinating criminal activities and covering them up. They were dismissed as paranoid conspiracy theorists who couldn't accept election results. Then, investigative journalists uncovered proof, and the conspiracy unraveled. The break-in was real, the cover-up was real, and the conspiracy went all the way to the top. The conspiracy theory emerged when a break-in occurred at opposition headquarters during an election campaign. Security guards caught burglars installing listening devices and photographing documents. The arrested men had connections to intelligence agencies and the ruling administration. Officially, the break-in was dismissed as a third-rate burglary by overzealous campaign workers. Administration officials denied any knowledge or involvement. They insisted that claims of high-level conspiracy were paranoid fantasies by political opponents trying to undermine a legitimate government. The media initially accepted this narrative. Suggesting the administration orchestrated the break-in was considered a baseless conspiracy theory. Two investigative journalists refused to let it go. They followed the money. They tracked connections between the burglars and high-level officials. They cultivated inside sources who provided explosive information. With each revelation, the conspiracy theory became harder to dismiss. The trail led higher and higher. Campaign officials were involved. Intelligence operatives had coordinated the operation. Money for the burglary came from campaign funds. But the most damaging revelation was the cover-up. The administration had immediately begun destroying evidence, paying hush money to the burglars, and using intelligence agencies to block investigations. As evidence mounted, officials continued denying everything. They attacked the journalists as politically motivated. They dismissed each revelation as distortion or coincidence. They insisted no conspiracy existed, and that claiming otherwise was partisan conspiracy theory. Then, the smoking gun emerged. Secret recordings proved that the highest officials had discussed the cover-up, approved payments to silence witnesses, and actively obstructed justice. The recordings were subpoenaed. Initially, officials refused to release them. When forced to comply, they released edited versions. When complete recordings were finally obtained, they proved everything the conspiracy theorists had claimed. The conspiracy was real and massive. Intelligence agencies had been used for political espionage. The break-in was ordered from high levels. The cover-up involved dozens of officials. Crimes were committed, evidence was destroyed, and the public was systematically lied to. Officials who'd called it a conspiracy theory were either complicit or deceived. The scandal destroyed careers and led to criminal convictions. The highest officials faced impeachment and resignation. The conspiracy theory that had been dismissed as paranoid political attack was proven to be accurate reporting of criminal conspiracy at the highest levels of government. What makes this case particularly significant is how thoroughly the conspiracy was denied, even as evidence mounted. Officials maintained denial until absolute proof made it impossible. The journalists who uncovered it were attacked as conspiracy theorists until the recordings proved them right. The pattern would repeat in future scandals. Deny, attack critics, admit only when evidence is undeniable. The political spying scandal proved that conspiracy theories about government wrongdoing aren't automatically false. Sometimes officials do abuse power, conduct illegal operations, and lie about it systematically. The people investigating these activities aren't paranoid. They're doing journalism. And sometimes the impossible conspiracy theory is actually criminal conspiracy fact. On mass surveillance systems. For decades, privacy advocates warned that governments were secretly monitoring all phone calls, reading all emails, and tracking everyone's internet activity. They claimed sophisticated computer systems were capturing every digital communication. They were dismissed as paranoid technophobes imagining an Orwellian dystopia. Then, in 2013, a whistleblower released classified documents proving every word was true. The conspiracy theory had existed since the 1990s. Tech experts warned that governments had the capability to monitor all digital communications and were almost certainly doing so. Officials responded with carefully phrased non-denials. They insisted they didn't monitor citizens without warrants. When pressed on whether mass surveillance existed, They said they couldn't discuss classified matters, but strongly implied such programs didn't exist. The truth emerged when a government contractor released thousands of classified documents to journalists, then fled the country knowing he'd face prosecution. The documents revealed a surveillance apparatus beyond what even conspiracy theorists had imagined. Intelligence agencies were collecting telephone metadata on hundreds of millions of citizens, every call made, received, duration, and location. They were capturing internet traffic, storing billions of emails, chats, and web searches. They had programs specifically designed to break encryption. The conspiracy claimed technology companies were cooperating with government surveillance. The documents proved major corporations had been compelled to provide secret access to user data. All had been forbidden by law from revealing the surveillance existed. Most disturbing was the scope. The surveillance wasn't targeted at suspected criminals. It was universal. Every citizen had their communications swept up, analyzed, and stored. The conspiracy theory had claimed parallel surveillance systems existed in allied nations to circumvent domestic spying laws. The leaked documents confirmed this exact arrangement. When revelations broke, officials initially denied them, then minimized them, then justified them. The whistleblower was declared a traitor. But the evidence was irrefutable. Internal government documents describing surveillance programs in explicit detail. The paranoid conspiracy theorists were vindicated. The whistleblower was exiled, unable to return home. And despite revelations, most surveillance programs continued operating with minor modifications. What makes this conspiracy's validation particularly chilling? If the government built a complete surveillance apparatus in secret and denied its existence for years, what else might they be doing that we are dismissing as impossible conspiracy theory? Tobacco's hidden research. For decades, tobacco companies insisted cigarettes were harmless. When scientists connected smoking to cancer, the industry claimed it was unproven speculation by conspiracy theorists trying to destroy a legitimate business. They funded studies showing cigarettes were safe, had doctors endorse smoking, and ridiculed anyone claiming tobacco caused cancer. Then internal documents were leaked and the conspiracy was exposed. They'd known cigarettes caused cancer since the 1950s and deliberately hidden the evidence. The conspiracy theory emerged in the 1950s when researchers published studies linking smoking to lung cancer. The tobacco industry's response was swift and coordinated. They denied the science, claimed research was flawed, and suggested fears about smoking were paranoid conspiracy theories. The industry created research foundations producing studies showing cigarettes were safe. They recruited doctors to appear in advertisements. They funded scientists who would cast doubt on the cancer connection. For decades, the strategy worked. Despite mounting evidence, the industry maintained the cancer connection was unproven. The truth began emerging in the 1990s when whistleblowers came forward with damaging documents. But the real bombshell came in 1998. When a massive legal settlement forced tobacco companies to release internal documents. Millions of pages became public, telling a devastating story. The documents proved tobacco executives had known since the 1950s that cigarettes caused cancer. Internal research had confirmed it. Company scientists had warned leadership. But rather than warning the public, tobacco companies made a calculated business decision to hide the evidence. The documents revealed coordinated campaigns to manipulate public opinion. Industry executives met regularly to coordinate messaging. They created front groups that appeared independent but were funded by tobacco companies. They paid scientists to publish papers questioning the cancer connection. Most damning were internal memos showing executives knew they were lying. One document from 1969 stated plainly, "Doubt is our product." The strategy was to create uncertainty about scientific evidence they knew was true, buying time to sell more cigarettes before regulations threatened profits. The conspiracy theorists had been right all along. Tobacco companies did know their products killed people and deliberately concealed that knowledge. The paranoid conspiracy theory was careful business strategy executed over decades, resulting in millions of preventable deaths. The tobacco conspiracy's exposure changed how we think about corporate cover-ups. It established the playbook used again in other industries: deny the science, fund contradictory research, attack critics, create doubt, and delay regulation while maximizing profits. What's particularly relevant, this conspiracy was exposed through leaked internal documents. The conspiracy ended only when insiders broke ranks and evidence was forced into public view. How many similar conspiracies remain hidden because documents haven't leaked? Prohibition-era poisoning. During Prohibition, rumors circulated that the government was deliberately poisoning industrial alcohol to deter bootleggers, knowing it would end up in illegal liquor and kill people who drank it. The claims were dismissed as absurd anti-government conspiracy theories. Then, decades later, historical research and declassified documents confirmed it was true. The government knowingly poisoned alcohol supplies, resulting in thousands of deaths. The conspiracy theory emerged during Prohibition when people started dying from drinking illegal alcohol. The deaths weren't just from badly distilled moonshine, they were from industrial alcohol that had been deliberately rendered toxic. Conspiracy theorists claimed the government was adding poisons knowing bootleggers would sell it as drinking alcohol. Officials denied the accusations. They claimed deaths were caused by careless bootleggers, not government policy. Media dismissed concerns as conspiracy theories from criminals upset their illegal activities had consequences. The truth was more sinister. Industrial alcohol was being stolen by bootleggers and sold as drinking alcohol. Rather than increase enforcement, the government chose a different strategy: make the industrial alcohol more toxic. Starting in 1926, the government mandated that industrial alcohol be denatured with increasingly poisonous chemicals. Methanol, which causes blindness and death, benzene, a carcinogen, and various toxic compounds. The government knew bootleggers were stealing this alcohol. They knew it would be consumed by humans. They mandated the poisons anyway. Officials claimed the denaturants would deter theft because bootleggers couldn't remove the poisons. This was false. The government's own experts knew redistillation could remove some denaturants, but not all, and not completely. The alcohol would still be dangerous, but bootleggers would sell it anyway. The policy was deliberate deterrence through poisoning. Officials reasoned that if drinking illegal alcohol became deadly, people would stop. They accepted that thousands would die before the message became clear. Medical examiners began seeing waves of alcohol poisoning deaths. In 1926 alone, over 1,200 people in New York City died from poisoned alcohol. Nationwide, estimates suggest at least 10,000 people died from consuming government-poisoned industrial alcohol during Prohibition. The conspiracy remained hidden for decades. Not until researchers in the 1990s examined government documents did the full scope become clear. Internal memos showed officials knew the denaturants would kill people and considered the deaths an acceptable deterrent. The conspiracy theorists had been right. The government did poison alcohol supplies, knowing people would die. Officials made a calculated decision that killing citizens who violated Prohibition was acceptable policy. What makes this proven conspiracy particularly disturbing is the justification. The victims were criminals who deserved it. This reasoning appears repeatedly in conspiracy theories. And as this case proves, sometimes that reasoning reflects actual government policy. Hidden drug dangers. For years, skeptics claimed pharmaceutical companies were hiding evidence that their drugs cause serious harm, prioritizing profits over safety. The industry dismissed these claims as anti-science conspiracy theories. Then, court cases forced internal documents into public view, and the conspiracy was proven. Companies had deliberately hidden evidence their drugs were dangerous. The conspiracy theory existed for decades. Critics claimed pharmaceutical companies manipulated clinical trials, suppressed negative results, and marketed dangerous drugs while hiding evidence of harm. The industry responded with outrage, insisting claims of systematic deception were paranoid conspiracy theories. The truth began emerging through lawsuits when patients harmed by drugs obtained internal documents. Case after case revealed the same pattern. Companies had evidence their drugs caused serious harm, and they hid it. One damning case involved a popular pain medication. Internal documents revealed the company knew the drug significantly increased risk of heart attacks and strokes. Studies showed this risk before the drug's approval. Rather than warn doctors and patients, the company buried the research and marketed the drug as safe. The drug was prescribed to millions, Estimates suggest it caused tens of thousands of heart attacks and strokes before being pulled from the market. The company paid billions in settlements, but never admitted wrongdoing. More cases followed, revealing a systematic pattern. Companies routinely conducted studies showing their drugs were dangerous or ineffective, then never published those studies. Only positive results saw publication, creating a completely distorted picture of drug safety in medical literature. This practice was exactly what conspiracy theorists had warned about. When half the studies about a drug show it doesn't work or causes harm, but only the positive half get published, doctors and patients get a false impression. The conspiracy theorists called it systematic manipulation of medical evidence. Internal documents prove them right. Another drug marketed to teenagers had internal studies showing it was ineffective for that age group and increased suicide risk. The company not only hid the negative studies, but funded misleading papers suggesting the drug was safe for teens. When families sued, internal documents revealed the company had known about suicide risk. The documents exposed another tactic: ghostwriting. Drug companies hired medical writers to write papers, then recruited academic doctors to put their names on the papers as authors. Papers promoted company drugs while appearing to be independent academic research. A medical journal editor estimated that perhaps 50% of clinical trial data had never been published, specifically trials showing drugs were dangerous or ineffective. This wasn't speculation. It was based on comparing registered trials to published results. What vindicates conspiracy theorists most? The behavior continues. Despite exposed scandals and massive fines, pharmaceutical companies keep hiding negative results. The incentive structure rewards deception. Billions in drug sales versus millions in potential fines. The pharmaceutical conspiracy proves that profit-motivated corporations will systematically hide evidence of harm when disclosure threatens revenue. The people dismissed as anti-science conspiracy theorists were right. Deadly medical experiments. For 40 years, the government claimed to be treating poor black men for bad blood with free medical care. In reality, they were conducting an experiment, deliberately leaving hundreds of men untreated for a deadly disease to study its progression. The men were never told they had the disease, never given available cures, and were actively prevented from receiving treatment elsewhere. When rumors circulated about the unethical study, officials dismissed them as conspiracy theories. Then a whistleblower came forward, and the truth destroyed any remaining faith in medical ethics. The conspiracy theory had circulated in black communities for years. People whispered that the government was using black citizens as human guinea pigs, letting them suffer and die from treatable diseases to study the effects. These concerns were dismissed as paranoid conspiracy theories rooted in historical mistrust rather than current reality. Medical authorities insisted all research followed strict ethical guidelines. The truth emerged in 1972 when a public health worker, horrified by what he'd discovered, contacted a journalist. What the journalist uncovered was worse than any conspiracy theory had imagined. Since 1932, government health officials had been conducting a study on untreated disease progression. They recruited 600 impoverished black men, telling them they were receiving free health care for bad blood, a local term for various ailments. In reality, 399 of the men had syphilis, and researchers wanted to study the disease's untreated progression. The men were never told they had syphilis. They were never given treatment, even when penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s. Researchers actively prevented them from receiving treatment elsewhere. When men tried to enlist in World War II, where they would have received treatment, researchers intervened to keep them out of the military. The study continued for 40 years. Men went blind, insane, and died from complications that could have been easily cured. Their wives contracted the disease. Their children were born with congenital infections, all while government doctors monitored them, took notes, and prevented treatment. When the study was finally exposed, officials initially defended it as valuable scientific research. They claimed the men had volunteered and knew what they were participating in. Both claims were false. The men had been deceived from the beginning and were kept in the dark for 4 decades. The conspiracy theory that the government was conducting unethical experiments on black citizens was proven true in the most horrifying way possible. The study violated every principle of medical ethics. It was racist in conception and execution. And it was defended by respected medical authorities who saw nothing wrong with letting poor black men die for research purposes. The exposure led to new regulations on human experimentation, but the damage was done. An entire community's suspicions about medical racism had been validated. The paranoid conspiracy theory was documented government policy, carried out by doctors and scientists for 40 years. What makes this conspiracy particularly devastating is how long it continued after treatment became available. For nearly 30 years after penicillin could have cured the disease, researchers deliberately withheld treatment. They watched men suffer and die when a simple injection could have saved them. The study's exposure vindicated every conspiracy theory about medical racism and government exploitation of vulnerable populations. It proved that prestigious medical institutions could conduct horrifyingly unethical research with government funding and support. It showed that when conspiracy theorists from marginalized communities warn about being used as experimental subjects, sometimes they're absolutely right. Sugar industry manipulation. For decades, nutrition experts blamed fat and cholesterol for heart disease, while sugar was considered relatively harmless. Public health recommendations emphasized low-fat diets. People who suggested sugar was the real culprit were dismissed as conspiracy theorists promoting fad diets. Then internal industry documents were uncovered, revealing a massive conspiracy. The sugar industry had paid scientists to manipulate research, shift blame to fat, and suppress evidence that sugar caused heart disease and other health problems. The conspiracy theory was simple. The sugar industry was corrupting nutrition science to protect profits. They were funding biased research, paying scientists to reach predetermined conclusions, and manipulating public health policy. Mainstream nutritionists dismissed these claims as conspiracy theories by diet cranks who didn't understand science. For decades, the official narrative was clear. Fat, especially saturated fat, caused heart disease. Sugar was just empty calories. Not great, but not particularly harmful. Public health campaigns urged people to eat low-fat diets. Food companies created low-fat products loaded with sugar. The sugar industry presented itself as providing harmless sweetness and energy. The truth emerged in 2016 when researchers uncovered internal sugar industry documents from the 1960s. The documents revealed a calculated conspiracy to manipulate nutrition, science, and public health policy. In 1967, the sugar industry paid scientists to publish a major review paper in a prestigious medical journal. The scientists minimized evidence linking sugar to heart disease while emphasizing evidence against fat. The paper was enormously influential, shaping nutrition policy for decades. But it wasn't objective science. It was paid advocacy disguised as research. The sugar industry had paid for specific conclusions, reviewed drafts, and ensured the final paper served their interests. More documents revealed the scope of the conspiracy. The sugar industry funded research designed to produce sugar-friendly results. They paid scientists to attack research showing sugar's harms. They created front groups that appeared independent but promoted industry messages. They lobbied government agencies to ignore evidence against sugar while emphasizing evidence against fat. One particularly damning document showed industry executives discussing how to counter negative attitudes toward sugar. Their strategy was to fund research questioning sugar's role in disease while promoting research implicating fat. They specifically targeted influential scientists and institutions, offering research funding with implicit expectations about results. The conspiracy extended to suppressing research. When studies showed sugar caused health problems, the industry worked to prevent publication. They funded contradictory studies designed to create doubt. They attacked researchers whose findings threatened sugar sales. One scientist who published concerning research about sugar found his work viciously attacked by industry-funded scientists and his research funding mysteriously cut. The sugar industry also manipulated dental research. When evidence showed sugar caused tooth decay, they funded research suggesting that brushing teeth and fluoride were the solutions, deflecting responsibility from sugar consumption. They lobbied against public health measures targeting sugar while promoting solutions that didn't threaten their profits. The conspiracy's impact was enormous. For decades, public health policy was based on science that had been secretly manipulated by industry funding. Millions of people followed dietary advice that protected sugar industry profits rather than public health. The obesity and diabetes epidemics that followed were at least partially caused by incorrect nutrition guidelines, influenced by industry manipulation. What vindicated the conspiracy theorists was documentation of intentional manipulation. This wasn't just industry funding creating bias. It was paid advocacy disguised as objective science. The sugar industry knew their product caused health problems and deliberately corrupted scientific research to hide that evidence. The sugar conspiracy proved that nutrition science could be systematically corrupted by industry money. It showed that prestigious scientists at elite institutions could be paid to reach predetermined conclusions. And it demonstrated that conspiracy theories about industry manipulation of science are sometimes absolutely accurate. Today, we're still living with the consequences. Decades of sugar industry-influenced policy created dietary guidelines that promoted sugar consumption while demonizing fat. The people who questioned those guidelines and suggested sugar was the real problem were dismissed as conspiracy theorists. The documents proved they were right. FBI targeting activists. For 15 years, the FBI conducted an illegal domestic counterintelligence program that targeted American citizens for exercising their constitutional rights. Agents infiltrated peaceful organizations, incited violence to discredit movements, sent anonymous letters designed to drive activists to suicide, and assassinated civil rights leaders. When exposed in 1971, the government claimed it had ended. Evidence suggests the techniques were simply rebranded and continue today. The program officially ran from 1956 to 1971. Its targets included the civil rights movement, anti-war activists, indigenous rights organizations, women's rights groups, and anyone the FBI deemed subversive, a category that expanded to include journalists, lawyers, and religious leaders who questioned the government policy. The program's existence was discovered accidentally. In 1971, activists broke into an FBI office and stole classified documents. What they found was shocking. Thousands of pages detailing systematic harassment, psychological warfare, and illegal surveillance. The documents revealed operations designed to disrupt, misdirect, discredit, and neutralize political organizations. FBI agents didn't just monitor activists, they actively worked to destroy their lives. Against the Black Panther Party, the FBI's tactics were particularly vicious. Agents sent anonymous letters claiming members were informants, sparking violent confrontations that left people dead. Most notoriously, the FBI provided police with a detailed floor plan of a leader's apartment and drugged his drink before a 1969 raid that killed him while he slept. The FBI's war against the civil rights movement exemplifies the program's depravity. Agents bugged hotel rooms, recorded private conversations, and sent anonymous letters along with tapes of allegedly compromising material, urging a prominent leader to commit suicide. The letter, mailed 34 days before he was to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, read in part, "There is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. You are done." Against the anti-war movement, agents infiltrated groups and encouraged illegal activity, providing weapons and explosives to create criminal cases. In some instances, the infiltrators were the only ones suggesting violence. When the program was exposed, the FBI director initially denied its existence. Faced with documentary evidence, he eventually admitted to certain activities, but claimed they were necessary to combat communism and terrorism. The official line became, "Yes, it existed," but it was terminated in 1971. That promise was a lie. Declassified documents from the 1980s and 1990s showed that the same techniques continued under different names. Later, administration's FBI targeted opponents of various policies using the same playbook. After 2001, the FBI admitted to infiltrating anti-war and environmental groups using identical tactics. No FBI agent was ever prosecuted. No victim received compensation. The government's position remains, these were overzealous but well-intentioned efforts that have since been corrected. The documents tell a different story, of a government agency that systematically violated constitutional rights, worked to suppress democratic participation, and faced no meaningful consequences. Climate change cover-up. For decades, environmental activists claimed that oil companies knew their products were causing climate change and were deliberately hiding the evidence to protect profits. The industry ridiculed these claims as conspiracy theories by anti-business extremists. They funded research questioning climate science, promoted scientists who denied climate change, and insisted they were simply following the science. Then internal documents were leaked, proving the conspiracy was real. Oil companies had known about climate change since the 1970s and had deliberately deceived the public for over 40 years. The conspiracy theory was straightforward. Oil companies knew fossil fuels caused climate change, but were lying about it to protect their business model. They were funding climate denial, manipulating research, and deceiving the public about existential threats to human civilization. Industry defenders dismissed these claims as paranoid conspiracy theories. The truth began emerging in 2015 when investigative journalists obtained internal documents from a major oil company. The documents told a damning story. As early as 1977, the company's own scientists had concluded that burning fossil fuels would cause significant global warming. Internal research papers accurately predicted temperature increases, ice cap melting, and sea level rise. The science was clear, and company leadership was informed. Rather than warning the public or adjusting their business model, the company made a calculated decision to suppress the evidence and promote doubt about climate science. While their internal scientists confirmed climate change was real and dangerous, their public messaging denied it. The documents revealed a coordinated strategy. The company funded research designed to cast doubt on climate science. They created and funded organizations that appeared independent but promoted climate denial. They paid scientists to publish papers questioning climate change. They lobbied governments to block climate policies, all while knowing their own research proved climate change was real and caused by fossil fuels. One particularly damning memo from 1988 discussed the company's strategy for responding to growing climate concerns. The memo acknowledged that climate change was real and that fossil fuels were the cause, but recommended a public relations strategy to emphasize the uncertainty in climate science. The goal was explicitly to prevent policy action that might threaten fossil fuel profits. More documents revealed the scope of the deception. The company had sophisticated climate models that accurately predicted warming decades in advance. They used this information internally to plan for a warming world, protecting their own infrastructure from rising seas and melting permafrost. Meanwhile, their public messaging denied climate change was happening. The conspiracy extended across the industry. Trade associations coordinated climate denial campaigns. Multiple oil companies shared strategies for combating climate science and policy. They collectively funded front groups that promoted climate denial while hiding industry funding. The documents showed deliberate manipulation of public opinion. The companies studied tobacco industry tactics for creating scientific doubt and adapted them for climate denial. They specifically sought to create the impression that climate science was unsettled and controversial, even though their own scientists knew it wasn't. One memo discussed recruiting scientists who would publicly question climate change. The goal wasn't to produce good science. It was to create the appearance of scientific debate. As long as the public believed scientists disagreed about climate change, policy action could be delayed or prevented. The conspiracy also involved attacking climate scientists. Industry-funded organizations launched campaigns to discredit researchers whose work confirmed climate change. They questioned methodologies, demanded data to attack studies, and created public controversies to undermine scientific credibility. The goal was silencing research that threatened fossil fuel profits. What makes this conspiracy particularly devastating is its consequences. While oil companies deliberately deceived the public about climate change, the world passed critical thresholds for preventing the worst impacts. Decades were lost to industry-manufactured doubt. The conspiracy wasn't just about protecting profits. It was about sacrificing human civilization's future for short-term financial gain. The exposure vindicated every conspiracy theorist who'd claimed oil companies were lying about climate change. The documents proved systematic, calculated deception over decades. Companies knew the truth, hid it, and promoted false information that delayed action on an existential threat. Today we're living with the consequences of this conspiracy. Every year of delay in addressing climate change was a year won by industry deception. The conspiracy theorists who warned that oil companies were lying about climate change weren't paranoid, they were right. And their warnings were ignored, while industry propaganda was amplified. Secret weather programs. For decades, people claimed governments were secretly conducting weather modification experiments, spraying chemicals from aircraft to alter rainfall or control storms. They pointed to unusual cloud formations and government documents discussing weather control. They were universally ridiculed as conspiracy theorists believing in chemtrails. Then, declassified military documents, congressional testimony, and international treaties confirmed it was all true. Governments have been conducting weather modification experiments for over 70 years. The conspiracy theory claimed aircraft were deliberately spraying chemicals into the atmosphere to modify weather. Skeptics responded with ridicule. Contrails were just ice crystals. Weather modification on a large scale was impossible, except it wasn't. Weather modification programs have existed since the 1940s. Cloud seeding, dispersing chemicals like silver iodide into clouds to stimulate rainfall, has been practiced for decades. Governments and private companies use it regularly. The technology works, it's scientifically established, and it's publicly acknowledged, though rarely discussed. What was hidden was the military application. Declassified documents revealed that during a major conflict in Southeast Asia, the military conducted weather modification operations for years. They seeded clouds to increase rainfall, attempting to make supply routes impassable. When rumors circulated about military weather control, officials denied it. The exposure forced official admission. The military confirmed they'd been conducting weather modification in a combat zone. Congressional hearings were held. International concern led to a treaty banning weather warfare. The conspiracy theorists who'd claimed military weather control programs existed were vindicated. But the conspiracy goes deeper. Documents revealed extensive research into climate engineering techniques, spraying particles into the upper atmosphere to reflect sunlight, creating artificial clouds, even schemes to alter global atmospheric circulation patterns. These weren't just theoretical papers, they were funded research programs. Government agencies investigated whether climate could be modified on regional or global scales. Some experiments were conducted. The research was real, ongoing, and largely conducted without public awareness. The conspiracy theorists claimed governments were already conducting atmospheric engineering experiments. Documents revealed that various substances had been deliberately released into the atmosphere to study dispersion patterns and investigate potential weather modification techniques. One program involved releasing barium and other chemicals into the upper atmosphere to study atmospheric winds. The releases created visible clouds. People who saw unusual cloud formations and suspected government experiments were dismissed as conspiracy theorists. Declassified documents proved they were right. Another document revealed military interest in using weather modification as a strategic tool. The concepts discussed included enhancing storms, directing hurricanes, creating and dispersing fog. These weren't science fiction, they were seriously studied military applications. The most controversial revelation involved geoengineering research. Documents showed government-funded scientists studying how to deliberately modify Earth's climate to counter warming. Proposals included spraying sulfate particles into the stratosphere and brightening marine clouds. This research was conducted with minimal public disclosure. The conspiracy theorists had claimed the governments were secretly spraying chemicals to modify weather and climate. The reality was nuanced but essentially confirmed their core claim. Governments were conducting atmospheric experiments, studying weather modification, and researching climate engineering, often without informing the public. What's particularly significant is how the conspiracy theory was used to discredit legitimate questions. Anyone expressing concern about atmospheric experiments was labeled a chemtrail believer and dismissed. This ridicule prevented serious public discussion about real weather modification and programs that were actually occurring. Today, weather modification is openly discussed in some contexts but remains controversial in others. Geoengineering research continues, often with minimal public engagement. The conspiracy theorists' core concern, that governments were manipulating atmosphere and climate without transparency or consent, has been proven valid. These 10 cases prove that conspiracy theories aren't always wrong. Sometimes the paranoid fears are justified. Sometimes the government is conducting secret experiments. Sometimes corporations are deliberately hiding harm. Sometimes officials are lying. And sometimes the people dismissed as conspiracy theorists turn out to be right. What makes these cases significant isn't just that the conspiracies were real, it's how they were exposed. Truth emerged not through official admission, but through leaks, whistleblowers, lawsuits, or investigative journalism that forced documents into public view. The conspiracies ended not because authorities decided transparency, but because they lost control of information. The pattern is consistent: deny, ridicule, discredit, then finally admit when evidence becomes undeniable. Officials don't voluntarily reveal conspiracies. They're forced to acknowledge them when concealment becomes impossible. By that time, years or decades have passed, and those who tried to expose the truth have often been professionally destroyed. These proven conspiracies reveal an uncomfortable truth. The label conspiracy theorist is sometimes used not to identify people spreading falsehoods, but to discredit people revealing uncomfortable truths. When authorities want to prevent examination of their actions, they don't present evidence. They attack credibility, dismiss questions as conspiracy theories, and rely on public assumption that conspiracy theories are inherently absurd. But, as these 10 cases prove, conspiracy theories aren't inherently absurd. The government did conduct political espionage and medical experiments. Tobacco and sugar companies did hide evidence. Pharmaceutical and oil companies did suppress research. The FBI did target activists. Weather modification programs did exist. Each conspiracy theory that was ridiculed turned out to be documented fact. This creates a dilemma. How do we distinguish between valid conspiracy theories and false ones? These cases suggest an uncomfortable answer. We often can't until internal documents leak or whistleblowers risk everything to reveal truth. And by then, the conspiracy has usually achieved its goals. The conspiracies that get proven are likely just the visible portion. These are the ones where evidence survived, whistleblowers came forward, or documents were inadvertently preserved. How many other conspiracies remain hidden because records were successfully destroyed, whistleblowers were silenced, and evidence was completely controlled? Perhaps the most important lesson is institutional behavior. When organizations conduct activities they know are wrong, they don't announce them, they classify them, deny them, and attack anyone who exposes them. The methods used to hide these proven conspiracies, classification, denial, ridicule of critics, destruction of evidence, are the same methods used today on current conspiracy theories. So, which current conspiracy theories will be tomorrow's proven facts? Which paranoid delusions will future declassified documents reveal were accurate all along? Which people being ridiculed today as conspiracy theorists will be vindicated decades from now when truth finally emerges? These 10 proven conspiracies teach us that dismissing concerns as conspiracy theories isn't an argument, it's a tactic. Sometimes the conspiracy theorists are wrong, but sometimes, as history proves, they're the only ones telling the truth.